My name is Clayton Powell, and I'm just your normal red-blooded guy. Most of my life, I was chunky or overweight, until I got to high school. I slimmed down in high school because I played football, and it was because of football that I got my nickname, Dozer, because I hit you. You were going down. When you're 6 feet 2 inches tall and weigh 240 pounds, in our high school you were expected to play football. I was not that good of an athlete, but I had good upper body strength, even in high school, and could put defensive linemen on their rear ends. Being on the football team came with privileges. Girls liked me. I didn't consider myself a chick magnet, but girls were more than willing to go out with me. Still, I didn't date very much until my senior year. That was when I met Rachel. Rachel Daniels had transferred to our school toward the end of my sophomore year. Even though we had a few classes together, I really didn't notice her until our senior year. Rachel had the most beautiful face I had ever seen, but she was at least 25 to 35 pounds overweight. This turned most of the guys off. And looking back on it, and I'm not proud to admit this, but I wasn't interested in Rachel at first either. It wasn't until we were paired up in physics that I really got to know her. Physics for me was more than complicated, but not for Rachel, so she helped me a lot. I would go so far as to say that if it wasn't for Rachel, I would have failed physics and probably not gone to college. While we were partners, I learned how friendly and funny she was. I also learned that we had a few things in common. We had the same tastes in music. We liked the same pro football teams, which was so cool to me that she was into football. We liked the same foods. I really fell for her. I eventually got up the courage to ask her out. It was a simple date where I just took her to the movies and then out for ice cream. It was a fun date, but I was too shy to try and kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her. I could see she was thrilled. We went on several dates over the next several weeks. By the third date, I had worked up the courage to give Rachel a kiss on the cheek. Then we progressed to making out. The more I saw of Rachel, the more I cared about her. While our romance was moving slow, the football season was moving in a surprising direction. My high school, Lumber High, had never been much of a football powerhouse, but this season, all the stars seemed to be aligning. Dean Phillips was our star quarterback, and we had the Jackson Winds, Travis and Tracy, as our running backs. I was now the left tackle, and I protected Dean's blind side. I did a good job too. Dean was never sacked by anyone coming around my end. We had lost our first game of the season to Oak High, 31-21. Oak High had always been the football team to beat, and they could probably beat a few college teams. After that game, we ran off 7 straight wins and advanced to the regionals. We made it all the way to the state finals before DePaul High put us down 38-14. I'm sorry, I don't get to relive the glory days of high school football very often. I couldn't resist. Anyway, my romance with Rachel continued, and we had advanced to second base. When prom season arrived, I asked her to be my date. She shouted yes with excitement. During the 4 weeks before the prom, Rachel went on a crash diet. She lost about 25 pounds to fit into the prom dress she had purchased. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Even though she was still what most guys would consider fat, I thought she was gorgeous. Rachel had always been well endowed, but they had never been so noticeable until I saw her in that light blue prom dress. The dress barely contained her assets as they threatened to spill over the top. The night was amazing for both of us as we danced with each other the entire night. When the evening came to a close, I wanted to go to the point and park with Rachel, but she had other ideas. She directed me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town. Her uncle had a nice secluded cabin that he used when he wanted to go hunting. The cabin was, indeed, nice. It only had a tiny kitchen, a couch in front of a television, a bed, and a bathroom. We started on the sofa, with our usual fooling around. After about 20 minutes, I had unzipped Rachel's prom dress, and she stepped out of it. Her voluptuous curves were driving me wild.
Well, what are you waiting for?
She asked. I was out of my clothes in no time flat. I took her by the hand and led her to the bed. One thing led to another. I wasn't quite sure what to do, so I just followed Rachel's lead. We kissed and we were intimate. It was absolutely incredible. Afterwards, we kissed and cuddled. Then we enjoyed each other one more time before heading home, and I got Rachel back to her house 10 minutes before her curfew of 2 a.m. Rachel and I remained close throughout the rest of high school. We were intimate whenever we could be, but we were always careful to use protection. With graduation, I had been offered a partial scholarship to play football for a Division III school 3 states away. Since I was going away to school, we discussed what we should do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up. We felt that it wasn't fair to tie the other down. It was the hardest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how horrible I felt going off to school and leaving Rachel behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, we would. I was terrified I was going to lose her. I was hurting so badly. When I arrived at Anderson University, I almost headed straight home. But I couldn't do that. I had made a commitment to the university, and I would honor it. Besides, I really wanted to get a college education. The only thing that I could think to do was to throw myself into my football practices and my schoolwork. From the time I woke up until I laid my head on my pillow at night, I pushed myself to keep my mind occupied. My coaches and my teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Even though the coaches advised against it, I took a full load of classes. One thing about being a college football player, they burned the last of my fat off and replaced it with muscle. That combined with all the weight training, and I had not only upper body strength but lower body as well. Since I only had a partial scholarship, my parents had to cover the balance. I knew they were struggling with the cost, but since I was playing football, I couldn't help financially. I had no money to come home, but I called Rachel every week. She seemed as devastated by our split up as I was. My first year of college came to an end, and it had been successful from a football and academic standpoint. By the fourth game I was starting left guard. My added strength allowed me to open holes for our running backs, and we finished the season with an 8-2 record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list. My parents were thrilled. During the summer, Rachel and I picked up where we had left off. I had fallen for her and was crazy in love with her, or at least that is what I believed at the time. I have gone back and forth as to whether we were indeed in love or just in lust. I think for me anyway it was love because a small part of me still loves her. I worked during the summer and took 3 online courses. I was determined to finish college as soon as possible. Rachel and I picked up our extracurricular activities also. I was exploring her every way I could, every chance we had. I finished college and married Rachel right after graduation. We both took jobs with the same company in Maryland, Peer Electronics. I worked as an engineer in software development, and Rachel worked in accounting. After 2 years, we had saved up enough money to buy a small house and started talking about having a family. Our first 2 years of marriage were great except for one thing. We both had put on a significant amount of weight. Rachel now weighed 220 pounds, and I was topping the scales at 320 pounds. I could carry the extra pounds better than Rachel because of my height. Neither one of us was happy about the excess weight, but neither one of us could stick to any diet. As far as I was concerned, I loved Rachel, no matter what size she was. After 3 years of marriage and no kids, we consulted our family doctor. After running a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us but suggested that we lose some weight. He felt that it might help Rachel conceive. So, for the first time in our lives, we went on a strict diet. After 6 months, Rachel was down 50 pounds. I was only down about 25. But I have to admit that I cheated more than I should. Rachel's weight loss was noticeable. I could see that men were starting to eye her like they had never done before. In addition to the diet, Rachel now went to the gym 6 days a week. As I watched her, I realized I had to get my ass in gear. I stayed on our diet and hit the gym with her. At the end of 1 year of dieting, Rachel had shed 85 pounds, and I had lost 80. We were both feeling really good about ourselves. As Rachel lost weight, she began dressing provocatively. At first, I really enjoyed it, but when I started overhearing some of the comments at work, I didn't like it. But I couldn't say anything because, for her whole life, in her mind she had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me was when Dean Phillips was appointed head of accounting. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior engineer. He was now 2 levels above me, and he was now Rachel's boss. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Dean was married to Angie Barnes, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. I danced with Angie a couple times at a Christmas party while Dean danced with Rachel. I have to admit that dancing just apart from her, I became aroused. That was no big deal though because, still being in my 20s, any woman could get me aroused. But one thing I really appreciated about Angie was that she was down to earth.
I didn't recognize you or Rachel when Dean and I arrived. You guys look fabulous. I always thought Rachel had a beautiful face, but now she's a knockout. You better keep an eye on her.
Thank you, that's very kind, I said, a little embarrassed. You guys look fabulous too. Dean looks the same as he did in high school, and you look even better.
Thank you, that's really sweet of you.
2 months before our 4th anniversary, Rachel informed me that she was going back on birth control pills. I objected. What about having kids?
I've decided that I don't want any right now.
Oh, just like that, you've decided. To say I was angry was an understatement.
Look, we'll have kids. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while.
I should have known that there was a problem right then, but I was clueless. I trusted Rachel completely. Unfortunately, I could trust Dean as far as I could throw his low-down ass. Little did I know Dean had used every trick in the book to get Rachel. And as you can imagine, she was flattered that the hunky former high school football captain was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Rachel began working late and then going out with girlfriends. I was clueless, but I'm not stupid. When Rachel started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that my wife was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a private investigator, and in less than a week, he had all the evidence I needed. He had a video of Rachel and Dean having relations in the office. How he got that, I have no idea. He had pictures of them kissing at dinner. He had videos of Dean coming to my house while I was at work. And lastly, he had pictures of the two of them going at it on our living room floor. I have no words to describe the pain that I felt, finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Even though Dean and I weren't extremely close, I still considered him a friend. I was really hurting. A sucker in love. I still held out hope that when I confronted Rachel, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner, I told Rachel we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. I showed her the evidence from the private investigator, and Rachel immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of gin. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. "What do you have to say for your damn self?" I said coldly.
I didn't mean for it to happen.
"Oh, so it was an accident. Your clothes just happened to fall off, and you two just accidentally did it on our living room floor."
You don't have to be mean. If you had paid more attention to me, none of this would have happened.
"What did you say to me? How dare you? Don't try to turn this back on me. I've done nothing wrong. You're the one who is having an affair. You're the adulterer. You're the one who was caught. What do you have to say for yourself? She looked nervously at me but said nothing. So, what are we going to do about this? I was fighting to keep my anger under control. Do you want to be with Dean, or do you want to be with me? She said.
I love you, Clayton. But I love Dean too.
Well, you're going to have to choose, I said, almost biting my tongue. And I want to know by tomorrow what it's going to be. If you want to stay with me, you are never to see Dean again. You're going to have to quit that job, and we're going to have to go to counseling. Rachel nodded. You can sleep in the guest room until you make up your mind. I went into what used to be our bedroom and slammed the door. I got home early from work the next day. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been churning all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Rachel came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table as I had the previous night. She slipped into the chair opposite me. So, have you made up your mind? I demanded. Tears began to run down her cheek.
You know that I love you, Clayton, but I just can't give up Dean. I love him also.
I blew out a long breath to hide that my heart was breaking. Well, you've made your choice. Rachel just nodded, which cut me worse than if someone had plunged a knife into me. My brain was about to explode. I wanted to cry. I wanted to whip the hell out of them both. You picked a real winner, I said. Dean and Angie just had a baby girl. It doesn't bother you that you're going to leave that kid without a father. A tiny bit of anger flashed on Rachel's face mixed with a little bit of shame.
Dean was planning to divorce Angie even before we got together.
So, just like that, you're going to throw away almost 4 years of marriage? I asked as I continued struggling to hold back not only my temper, but also the tears.
I'm sorry if I've hurt you, Clayton. I didn't intend for this to happen. I just fell so in love with Dean, and he's in love with me. I have to be with him.
My hands twitched with an unbelievable urge to CHH, but I knew there was nothing to be gained by physical violence. I didn't want her to know how deeply she had hurt me, and there was no way that I was going to beg her to stay. I think that is probably the worst thing that any cheated-on husband can do. It is just a sign of total weakness. It's simping at its worst. Okay, I said simply. If you want a divorce, you've got it. A look of confusion filled her eyes, and maybe I imagined it, but also a little hurt. Maybe she thought I was going to fight to keep her, but I knew in my heart that if she had made up her mind to leave me, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. She got up and started packing her stuff. The next day, I went to the bank and our financial advisor. I explained what was happening and withdrew half of the funds in each account. I then opened separate accounts with my name only. I canceled all our credit cards and applied for new ones in my name only. I stopped by a realtor friend of mine and listed our house for sale. Finally, I visited a divorce lawyer. I made sure that Rachel was served at work. I also listed adultery as the cause. I was hoping that by having her served at work, she would be embarrassed or even better hurt. I wanted her to feel some of the pain that I was feeling. The divorce itself was relatively straightforward. Since we had only been married about 4 years and had no kids, there was nothing to argue over. We split everything 50-50 and went our separate ways. Dean's divorce was not so simple. He had a kid less than a year old, and Angie had never worked. He had to pay child support and alimony. One thing about Dean's divorce that I will admit gave me some pleasure. He decided to go cheap on his lawyer, and as a result he was forced to pay alimony for 15 years. He wasn't happy, but he signed the papers. 6 months after the divorces were final, Dean and Rachel got married. It was yet another gut punch I had to take. For the first couple of weeks after our breakup, I was totally lost. I'm not much of a drinker, so that didn't appeal to me. All I could think about was revenge. I'm pretty sure every married person who has ever been cheated on thinks about the same thing. I'd even started searching online for information about how ex-husbands got revenge on their former wives and lovers. I began reading story after story about guys who had gotten revenge. At first, my only thoughts of revenge involved violence. Then I started planning to destroy their property, but I quickly realized that both of those ideas would just blow back on me. The more stories I read about revenge, the more I realized how ridiculous most of them were. I found no way to gain the revenge I wanted. Finally, I sought professional help. My therapist explained to me that the hurt from my wife's betrayal wouldn't go away with any kind of revenge. No matter how much I hurt my former wife or her new husband, the pain would still be there. He told me that only time and distance would heal my heart. Even though I wasn't sure I believed him, I realized that being near Rachel and not being able to be with her would tear open the wound every time I saw her. I also realized that my therapist was right about one thing. Revenge wouldn't stop the hurt, so I took his advice. That meant I had to put distance between Rachel and me. My opportunity came when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had taken on a contract that had deal promised big profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Department of Defense. The project was over budget and behind schedule. Usually, no one worried too much about government contracts, but this one was different. There were huge profits to be made. However, the company would also have to pay tremendous penalties if it didn't deliver on time. As one of the senior software engineers, I was called in to consult on the project. All the other engineers didn't want to touch this project. In fact, most of them were updating their resumes and looking to jump ship. If you took this on and failed, not only would you be fired, but the company would probably tank. But at that point in my life, I figured I didn't have a damn thing to lose. Now that I was divorced, I didn't need much. If I lost my job, so what? I'll just get another one, change industries or whatever. Plus, Rachel was now pregnant by her dearly beloved dirtbag Dean. That was like a dagger to my heart. I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California. I was going to put about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. I immersed myself in work. My days were long, sometimes 20 hours at a stretch, which didn't give much time to think about Rachel. I fired most of the engineers and programmers. I brought in new people. I scrapped everything they had done to date, even though our deadline was only 11 months away. I brought in some of the most creative engineers in the company to work with me. I even poached some really excellent engineers from rival companies. When I explained what I wanted them to build, they were skeptical. But when I told them what I wanted the electronic components built that way, they were stunned. They suddenly realized how simple my idea was. However, I still had to make the software work. Slowly, but surely, we put together a program that I felt good about, but it wasn't until 3 weeks before we had to deliver our product that I knew we had done it. Our first test combining the software and the electronic components showed a 99% success rate. And as I scanned the 1% that hadn't worked, I knew that they were easy fixes. Once it was revealed that our program worked, the Defense Department announced that they were expanding our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines. I realized that we could tweak the program, and it would have multiple commercial applications too. The list of things we could adapt to this program seemed endless. After that success, I was promoted to a senior vice president. Over the next couple of years, I frequently had to return to the Virginia home office. Thankfully, I didn't run into either Dean or Rachel during these visits. Even though I didn't think it would affect me at all, I didn't want to be bothered. I had nothing to say to either of them after all this time. The therapist, who had given me the advice about putting time and distance between me and my painful divorce, had been 100% right. I had moved on. During one of my visits, I ran into Stephanie Cooper. She had been a cheerleader back at Lumber High. She and Angie had been best friends. I knew that she had married John Dukes and had had a son. Before I found Rachel, I had always had a crush on Stephanie. She was a smoke show, and it was impossible not to like her. In high school, she had been voted most popular. She had aged some, but was still quite attractive. Physically, she was the opposite of Rachel. While Rachel had short blonde hair and was overly well endowed, Stephanie was petite with long black hair. I was stunned that she recognized me. I was in a grocery store getting a few things because I was supposed to make a presentation to the board of directors. Formal updates with the board always meant I'd be in town for a week. The company had several apartments for executives that came from out of the area. They were furnished, but there was never any food in them.
Clayton, is that you?
Stephanie called to me as I was trying to decide which frozen dinners to buy. I immediately recognized her and blushed slightly when she called my name again. I guess I still had a little crush on her. Stephanie, I smiled as she stopped her basket next to mine. I'm flattered that you recognized me.
I wouldn't have, but Angie pointed you out when she came to have lunch with me at Pier.
You work at Pier. I was truly stunned. She smiled and nodded.
I've been there for about 6 years. I work in marketing.
I was surprised to discover that Stephanie worked at the same company as me. I felt a little guilty that I didn't know that. However, I had almost nothing to do with marketing, so I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt as though I should have known. How are you doing? I finally asked to cover my discomfort.
I'm doing as well as can be expected. I'm divorced now. John has turned out to be a real turd. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also a half-dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty light considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't have a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hound him for it each month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son. I get furious when I think about it.
I'm really sorry, Stephanie. I apologized. I always knew John was a bit of a wild man, but I thought he would settle down once he got married. I paused for a moment and looked into Stephanie's beautiful emerald green eyes. I didn't really know what to say next, so I decided to just commiserate with her. I guess you know that my wife and I are divorced. Rachel decided to chase after Dean.
No, Clayton, it was Dean who chased Rachel, and she told me all about it.
I guess I can't argue with that, I admitted, but it takes two to tango.
You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?
Yeah, I'm afraid so, I nodded. I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle.
Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good.
I almost turned her down, but the thought of a home-cooked meal was something I couldn't pass up. If it's not an inconvenience, I wouldn't mind having a real meal. I can't remember the last time I had one. That evening was delightful. Stephanie made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was fun having someone to talk to. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like I was. We had fun talking about the team and their prospects for the coming season. I was a real fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company paid for them because I would take prospective customers to the games. When I didn't have any customers, I'd invite my buddies. And if I couldn't find anyone at all to go with me, I'd go by myself. I'd give the other 3 tickets away, usually to people who were trying to buy from a scalper.
I wish I could go to a game someday, Scotty said wistfully.
I can make that happen, I said impulsively. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I realized that I had overstepped my bounds and quickly tried to fix it. That is, of course, if your mother will approve of it. Scotty looked over at his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is,
We'll discuss it.
At the end of the evening, I apologized. I'm sorry about the offer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was out of my mouth before I realized what I was saying. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him going to a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him. She stood there, looking at me with piercing eyes. It was then that it hit me that I'd made another faux pas. I immediately tried to correct that one, only to create yet another. The invitation applies to you also. After a moment's pause, I stuttered, I'd get separate rooms for us. You and Scotty would be in one, and I'd be in the other. I could feel my face burning at my stupidity. But all that Stephanie did was smile.
You are the sweetest man. Your expression is priceless.
I breathed a sigh of relief. I really didn't want to offend Stephanie. I was starting to really enjoy her company and was hoping that we could get together again. Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to. Stephanie studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled.
Clayton, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had John. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me. And I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty.
Over the following year, I would call Stephanie every time I returned to Virginia, and we would get together. Several times, I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Stephanie and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucks needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Stephanie came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Stephanie knocked on my door, I was watching a local sports station as they did an in-depth analysis of the Bucks game. She was the last person I expected to come knocking on my door at that time of night. Is something wrong? I asked with real concern. Is Scotty all right?
No, nothing's wrong, and Scotty is sleeping soundly, happy that his Bics are going to the playoffs. I just was hoping that we could have a drink and talk.
I looked down at my boxer shorts and my t-shirt. Let me put some pants on, I said as I left the door to find my trousers. I thought I had tossed them on the chair in the corner. They weren't there.
No need,
Stephanie said as she pushed the door open and entered. I nervously looked for my pants, which weren't on the chair, and I couldn't find them on the floor either. I began scanning around the room, which brought a giggle from Stephanie. Now my face was fire engine red.
If you feel uncomfortable, I can put us on an even playing field.
Stephanie smiled, unbuttoned her skirt, and let it fall to the floor.
Now we're both in our underwear. Mix me a drink and come sit down.
I went to the minibar and pulled out 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I said, I'm not much of a drinker, but I do like rum and Coke occasionally. As I mixed the drinks, Stephanie climbed up on my bed and sat cross-legged. It was hard not to stare. After handing Stephanie her drink, I looked around trying to find a place to sit. Stephanie saw my head darting around and patted the bed beside her.
Clayton, come on, sit here. I don't bite.
Still bright red, I nodded and sat down next to her. I quickly took a big swallow of my drink. I could feel the rum course through my body, and I relaxed a bit. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked her if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Stephanie kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled.
I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable. Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore.
Stephanie had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. Tasted so sweet. When we broke apart, I said, "You're a beautiful and amazing woman." She pushed me down onto the bed and began taking her blouse off. I started removing my clothes as well. We kissed again and we enjoyed each other not like high school kids but two passionate adults that knew what they wanted and knew how to please their lover. This was amazing. If you had ever told me that I would be in bed with Stephanie Cooper, I would have told you that you are insane. But here I am enjoying her. No, I am ravishing her. 6 months after that night, Stephanie and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. John had been as bigoted as Stephanie had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. John was still close friends with Dean, and every time he came to Stephanie's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great relations Dean and Rachel were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Dean was still heading up the accounting department for the company, but Rachel had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Dean and Rachel had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time when I heard Stephanie on the phone, giving John hell for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs.
You need to stay out of this.
Stephanie said sternly.
He may ignore his son, but I'll be damned if I'm letting him slide on his child support. That's Scotty's money.
I knew when I needed to keep my mouth closed, and I haven't revisited child support with her since. That November, I was to be named executive vice president of the company. The announcement would be made at the Christmas party, which was to be held at the Davis Convention Center. There was going to be 500 or 600 people there. I was a little embarrassed that they were going to make a big deal about my promotion at this event, but Stephanie was happy.
You deserve this recognition.
She scolded me for complaining.
I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year.
Maybe, I said, but it doesn't matter. I'm married to the most beautiful woman in the world.
And I have a surprise for you.
What is it?
I'm pregnant. So now, there is no way I'm ever going to let you go.
She came into my arms and hugged me deep and hard. And I know that if we didn't have to go to the party, she would have ripped my clothes off. I have to admit that I'm not much of a party person. I have to go to so many that they have long since lost their charm. Stephanie still seems to enjoy them, but only if I'm by her side. She still has that aura that draws people to her. We danced quite a few dances and were just about to return to our table when we ran into Dean and Rachel. They were arriving late and were accompanied by John and his date, a beautiful girl named Gina. I was genuinely shocked. Rachel had put on at least 30 pounds, and Dean had a small pot belly that he tried to cover with his coat jacket. John, of course, was still fit and trim, but I reasoned that he was still on the make. I didn't know what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. It was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Peer.
Could I have your attention for just a moment? I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Brunner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Clayton Powell.
The spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Stephanie pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Rachel, Dean, John, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. John seemed pissed, and jealousy filled Dean's face. However, when I glanced at Rachel, there was a look of sadness and loss. I didn't know what to do or what to say, but Stephanie did.
Dean, Rachel, John, it's wonderful to see you.
She said as she hugged each one. Then she turned to Kathy and shook her hand.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Kathy.
I took my lead from my wife. I shook Dean, John, and Kathy's hands and gave Rachel a small hug. We chatted for a bit, and the music started to play. In a total surprise, Stephanie said,
Clayton, why don't you have a dance with Rachel? And I'll have a dance with my ex-husband. Kathy, why don't you and Dean have a dance also?
I looked questioningly at Stephanie, but she just smiled knowingly. So, I danced with Rachel. How have you and Dean been doing? I asked because I couldn't think of anything else to say.
Not particularly well.
She answered.
I think we're headed for a divorce. I'm pretty sure Dean has been cheating on me.
I'm really sorry to hear that, I replied.
Are you really, Clayton?
She looked at me with total skepticism.
I figured you'd say something like it serves you right.
I would never say that, I said, shocked at first by the comment. But then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something like that. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. The music stopped shortly after that, and tears were streaming down Rachel's face.
When I left you, I made the biggest mistake of my life, and there is nothing I can do to fix it.
I watched Rachel walk away from me, and I truly felt sorry for her. I felt Stephanie put her arm around me, so I leaned down and kissed her. How was your dance with John?
He's still a jerk.
She answered with a smile.
He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down, and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him and told him, why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world?
I watched Rachel reach their table and sat down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Dean and John appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I say that Dean tried to put a move on John's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Rachel left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. Have been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved, and totally happy.